So it began in November 2022 and it ends in June of this year. It was recently extended, so we've got a bit more time to kind of keep developing some of the outputs and do some more dissemination. So we're a bit more kind of in the middle in a way than we thought we would be with the final event, but it feels like a really nice time to share the way that the thinking is kind of coming together as we head towards the end of the project. It's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. It's funded through a scheme, it's actually changed now, but it was called a Research, Development and Engagement Fellowship, and it's an early career research route. There have been so many people involved in this project, and I don't have time to list everyone, but I want to mention a few people. So from the very beginning, I was really well supported by colleagues who looked at drafts. And supported the submission of the application. We've worked with 2 project partners, with One Dance UK and with Saddler's Wells. So a big thank you to Andrew Hurst and to the team at One Dance UK and to Robin Cabaret and the team at Saddler's Wells. I've also been really well supported by the advisory group, Robert Hilton, Anna Pakes, Subathra Subramanian, Vidya Thirunnarayan and Charlotte Belder. I've worked with Scott Della Hunter, who's a colleague here at FIDE, as my mentor on the project. And of course, Joe, who's not in the room because he's on the reception desk, but has been a really amazing project manager, and all of the ops team, and Heinrich with his amazing support of this event. We also had a project intern who I really want to mention, called Isaac Lee, who worked with us for a few months and did some really important work documenting some of the processes of the commissioned films. Of course, Lillian Vipp, without whom none of the project would have really happened in the way that it's happened. The 3 commissioned artists, so we commissioned Angela Bala, Kat Hawkins and Brooke Milliner, and their work has really been kind of central to the project. Whoops. And lastly, but definitely not least, all of the people who we interviewed and who were involved in the commissions, the observations, who have given their time and thoughts and energy to the project. So a really big thank you to everyone involved in those strands of the work. Can I still see? Okay, it's still on the thing. Okay. In the project, we were the main aim was to look at and understand how questions about the ontology of online dance overlap with questions about its ownership. And we look quite broadly at dance online, so obviously that can refer to a whole range of different types of things. With the commissioned films, we were interested in looking at the making of pieces that were intended to be shared primarily online, but more broadly in the project, the people that we talked to, is all the different ways that they share dance online. So that might be on social media, it might be recordings, clips of process. So we were looking quite broadly. There were areas that we didn't really dive into, like dance on TV, which of course technically now is often online, but we were kind of looking fairly broadly at dance online. We looked across 3 kind of, very broadly speaking, 3 strands of practice: so Indian dance forms, hip-hop, African dance practice, and different forms of street dance, and contemporary dance, and kind of recognise the complications of these kinds of terms and you know, the whole idea of genres and things, but trying to kind of find a way to draw some parameters around the scope of the project, and also so that we could look at the specific particular kinds of practices and the communities that build up around those practices. So what do we mean by ontology and ownership? Well, they're both quite big terms that seem to mean slightly different things in different contexts, and there's quite a lot that we could say about both those things, and for the sake of time I'm going to try and be kind of brief, but a lot of my work has in the past, and the thinking that kind of framed the beginning of this project has been thinking of ontology in the way that it's used in philosophical aesthetics, or analytic philosophy of art, and that's concerned really with asking questions about what kind of thing something is and the way that it exists. And so building on lots of existing work in dance ontology, including Anna Pakes' work, Graham McPhee and others, and asking those questions specifically of dance online. But it's also, the term's also used a bit differently in different contexts, and as Anna Pakes has written about, and others have talked about too, in performance studies and dance studies, it's often used in a way that's more to do with kind of understanding the essence of something, or kind of, what its qualities are, maybe. And of course, it's used differently in different other contexts again, like computer science, and there's lots to be said about that. So my work kind of does build really on the kind of analytic philosophy tradition in a way, but in the project we have used this idea more broadly, and particularly in the data analysis, the analysis of the interviews. We've used the idea of ontology quite broadly, and that also reflects, because Vip and I both analysed the interviews, so it reflects our different kind of histories and backgrounds and ways of thinking about this idea. The term ownership kind of perhaps has slightly kind of legalistic connotations, and we have looked at intellectual property law, but particularly, and again building on lots of other people's work in this area, but the kind of philosophical or ontological underpinnings of the way that the law is articulated. So looking at law from a quite kind of philosophical perspective, but more than the law, our focus has more been on the kind of social norms, the expectations, and the kind of social interactions and social conditions that manage the ownership of dance online. And again, that's building on a whole load of work, including people like Harmony Bench, Trevor Buffone, who've really looked at ideas such as the commons, the gifts, the thinking about different kind of ways that the social norms shape the way that dance is owned. It's felt like a really timely project because, I wrote it kind of, the draft kind of in COVID and coming out of the pandemic, and of course loads of stuff was happening online. And there's continued to be loads of debates about, social practice on social media, for example, around crediting and acknowledgement, legal cases brought against games companies, and now, of course, AI coming into the picture kind of much more strongly, and all the questions that raises about how we kind of ensure the fair potential reuse of dance online. So the ground has kept changing throughout the project, which has been really interesting, but also makes me still convinced that it's an important area to be looking at. So methods, lots of reading. I've mentioned a few key texts. There's so many people, and I can't mention everyone. There is a blog post on our website if you're interested in kind of hearing a bit, or reading a bit more about the kind of frameworks that we've been working on, and that's got quite a long reference list. Really building on a lot of people's work in dance, copyright, philosophy, across different areas. We did quite a few interviews. We interviewed 17 people across 15 interviews. So there was one group interview with 2 people, and then one person submitted some answers over email. These were on Teams generally, and about an hour. They were semi-structured, so we had a set of kind of guiding questions, but responded to what came up in the conversation. The analysis has been really fascinating, and we're still very much in the middle of it. It's really ongoing. I feel like there's sort of a paper in each transcript. It's really like a rich data set and really wonderful. And we've been, kind of going through and pulling out key ideas around ownership, ideas around ontology, and then my kind of, the very exciting moment I find when they kind of intersect and things are said that show the way that these two things work together. And we'll hopefully talk a bit about that in a minute if there's time. Just to go with the analysis, we're not approaching this in a kind of way where we're like trying to generalize or find like an answer of like the way ownership works. But from the very beginning of this project, I was really interested in what the relationship might be between empirical data coming from practice and kind of more philosophical, perhaps abstract theorizing. So we're really noticing when ideas come up that kind of test our philosophical positions or promote our thinking. And again, just to mention the commissions, again, a really integral part of the project, and we observed some of the making processes of each of those films, which Lily's going to talk about in a sec. We also did some analysis of online content. So with that, we were not so much looking at the kind of aesthetics, but asking questions about the way that it exists. So where is it? How does it relate to other events or existing content? So a kind of ontological analysis rather than kind of about the aesthetics. We're also looking at what are the economic models that kind of support this. Quite a lot more I could say about the activities, but maybe we'll just move on. for time, and if there's time at the end, I'll come back to that. So shall I hand over to you then to talk a bit about the analysis?
Are you white paper? Are you yes, right. The analysis of the interviews was based around ontology and ownership. The questions were as well. And we developed ideas around different types of ownership and also around ontological positions. Under types of ownership, these are more based on the approaches with a shared foundation rather than specific categories or these are very clear-cut types of ownership. And these broad approaches were direct and indirect control. Ownership is based around time, space, and place. Ownership around self, other, and others. And also around contributions of people to certain spaces and also the returns that they receive. Under ontology, ontological positions, which is how people see either the essence or the nature of the dance. And these were often very implicit rather than explicit. And the three ontological positions, the very broad positions, were around form and formlessness, around flow, which could be time-based, it could be about timelessness as well, and as related to a thing or a reference point. And it could also be a very relational position. So do I have time to go through the list, Hetty, or shall I not?
You know, I think that would be great.
Okay.
We've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just go through a few of the things under each of the approaches for types of ownership. Under types of ownership, it's worth noting that in the interviews, there were very few instances where people raised the legal notion of ownership, either because it wasn't the first thing in their mind, it didn't really matter to them. So the notion of their legal rights came up very rarely, which is very interesting. But also note that the questions that we asked weren't geared in that particular area. Also under direct and indirect control, ownership as control, and also the difficulties of control of the thing. Ownership as acknowledgement, as an expression of the ownership. Ownership as gratitude, so receiving gratitude. Some were very happy to just receive some kind of gratitude. Attribution as different from acknowledgement. So attribution would be direct to the source of the creator, the person who created the thing. And ownership as who did it first, which surprisingly came up a lot. And how do you document who did it first, or how do you stake your claim as being the first person to do this thing? Under time, place, and space, ownership has developed over time. Ownership as a continuous connection to a piece, no matter how long the time. Ownership is fluid. So the role of inspiration and one thing just flowing into another. Under self, other, and others, ownership of a role. Could be also ownership to a character, ownership in becoming a character. Feelings of ownership changing depending on the role. And by roles, this could be characters, it could be roles within a particular piece. Ownership as self-expression within the practice and when working within the established form. So you've got a form that is already established, and so your sense of ownership doesn't come from repeating that established form, but your self-expression of the things, of the movements within that particular form. There was a lot of that as well. Collective ownership and collective and historical ownership over place and time. Ownership about creating an experience for an audience. So for some people, the thing did not exist without the audience, and that links into ontology. And the feedback and engagement online, that mattered to many of the artists as well. Contributions return, ownership as not hugely significant due to limited potential for economic return. So this is around money. So quite a relaxed attitude around ownership within specific contexts. But if the content is reused in a commercial context, then that's when ownership becomes a bit different. So it's interesting the different ways that ownership overlaps within one artist's life and how it's more about the use by other people that changes how they are almost forced to think about the thing that they are producing. Right, moving on to ontological positions. Let's see what's interesting here. No, I don't read you the entire list. Under form or formlessness, for some, it just exists in the mind, in the imagination, might not even exist once it's out there, outside of their mind or imagination. It's not connected to specific formats or forms. It can be hybrid in terms of forms or formats. It can flow through different types of formats. For some, it exists in what is communicated, not even in the communication itself, but what does the receiving end say that they have received? And was that a successful communication or not? Or what is that thing? Context, very important for the nature of the thing. Under flow, a lot of times the process is as much the thing as is the product. Sometimes the thing exists before the making process. So it's pre-formed, but then it's formed somewhere, even before starting to make it. It's an ongoing process, it's never finished. There was the idea of gestation and pregnancy that came up. You can have a read of Mandy Rogerson's PhD. It's also linked, of course, beautifully about that. The piece emerging as it becomes clearer. The essence of a live work not being captured through documentation. So documentation just doesn't do it. It's not enough. Isn't able to. And the role of documentation in the piece lasting. Well, another. Thanks everyone for your patience and understanding. Yeah. And relational, so it exists online only for as long as it's watched or engaged with. So the whole tree in the forest situation. Well, other artists exist in the generation of meaning for human beings. If it doesn't generate meaning for somebody else, for the audience, it doesn't exist for them. The thing is reliant on being shared to exist. And interestingly, some even said, I created these movements just for copying. Like it needs to be repeated. It needs to be copied by other people for it to exist. So that I am copied, therefore I am. And dance online as having many purposes. So when the artists share their work, it has many purposes, many aims, many audiences, and some of these audiences' aims are unexpected. They arise without the intention really being there. Yeah. Thank you. Let me check onto the other stage then.
So as Hetty mentioned earlier, the three of us observed the commissioned artists in their making processes for their new commissioned film pieces. And I'll show in a moment the questions that we used as a framework for all three of these observations.
I made it short. Wow, that's good.
That was quite short.
Yep.
As I was so if you didn't have that, we used those questions as a framework for all three of the artists' observations. Hetty and I joined Anjana Bala, her dancers and filmmakers, on different days in a studio at East London Dance, where the dance was choreographed and developed, and then at the Clatch studio in London, where the filming took place. And this was all in April 2024. Anjana is a dance artist and anthropologist with a background in Bharatanatyam. The reason for these observations is that we were interested in how online dances are made and the considerations the choreographer and dancers go through, and if and how this differs from the making process of other types of dance. The methodology that Hetty devised for these observations was to have a number of questions to act as a guide and to make notes that might find their way to answer or at least get us thinking about these questions. Subsequently, we would share our notes in a grid that was divided up by these questions. There was not a strict rule, however, that if there were other observations that came up that weren't specifically related to these questions, we also noted those. So the questions, which won't be behind me, were how are choreographic decisions made? How does the structure, form, or score for the dance take shape? What references are there to the work or piece or dance? Are there moments in which the dance seemed to solidify or emerge either through choreographic decisions or dialogue? What references are made to the conventions of specific dance forms? What references are made about the ownership of the dance? And what references are made to the authorship of the dance as different to ownership? So there were 7 questions there that we were using for all 3 of the different observations. The questions that seemed to be the most relevant to my observations initially were about choreographic decisions, the structure and form of the dance, and there were not really any specific references to or conversations around authorship or ownership. So any observations made around these, I think, were my kind of own assumptions from my own experience. My observations did shift more towards ownership and authorship during the filming day. There were now other and new authors entering the space and making of this work. The videographer and cinematographer had their own roles in authoring the final filming of this piece, which drew me to note down questions about the transference or adding of authorship and ownership. The making of the film became multi-layered in this moment. The dance choreography is one layer, the performance of that choreography is another, plans for the filming, and the filming itself, for example. And are each of these elements authored and owned separately? And this also led me to question that does the dance exist in more than one entity, in the live ephemeral version and in the version that is captured and viewed through the medium of film? Some of these observations and questions, of course, remain open, but they reveal something about how ontologically dance exists in different ways and authorship can be possibly multi-layered.
Thanks. Thank you. I was going to talk a bit about some of the outputs, but I'm going to mostly leave that. But I just wanted to talk very quickly about something that we're developing that tries to draw on all of our experiences in the project and apply it in quite a practical way. So it's a kind of, I don't know whether to call it guidelines or prompts. Guidelines feels a bit didactic, but a series of kind of things to think about through across 4 areas. So making work for online, sharing, using, and watching. And so we're developing, a series of kind of questions for people to ask themselves when they're engaged in each of those areas. We've got a couple of drafts that I've printed off, and I'll put one in each room if you want to have a look at that. We'd really love to hear any feedback. Please don't take it anywhere just because we're trying to wait until it's a bit more finished before it sort of goes out into the world, but we'd really love to hear your comments. So these are around, and please let me know. I'm really sorry, but we're actually going to have to move next door for the next part of the session for the artist panel because Kat's online and at the moment we wouldn't be able to see them on this screen. So if you don't mind, sorry, just moving to the next room here.